Hi, everyone. Mondian Astral Oracles here. And thank you for liking, sharing, commenting, subbing, watching, being, existing out there. So thank you to you for being here. I'm going to talk about loneliness. And it's a topic that comes up a lot, both in my own process and in personal work with people and on the spiritual path in general. Well, it's probably also a part of the modern human condition, but indeed loneliness have of course been exacerbated in these past years, and it seems to amplify a tendency that's already there in modern societies, which is to separate people more and more from sort of these immediate units of connectivity. And of course, when we were still roaming around in the treetops, we had an immediate connection to nature, but we also had an for better or worse, immediate connection to community, and which we of course also had when we primarily lived in villages and in these smaller communities. And then what happens with industrialization is also that with people being drawn into the cities, they're removed from their immediate context, and they're also removed from performing more meaningful labor. In the beginning, at least, so there's this whole process of alienation that's sort of repeated in philosophy and existentialism, and of course in Marxism as a general societal critique, and in art as something that also emphasizes all these sort of disjointed states of human consciousness. And if you, I'm dating myself here probably, but if you were brought up in the 80s and 90s, you might remember like this obsession with what is ugly and ironic and dark and dysfunctional in the human psyche. And this all speaks to the phenomenon of loneliness. It is sort of the condensation of it. And other terms you could use is, of course, yes, the term of alienation or isolation. And no, I don't think it's up here, but of course it's also a major theme in literature in the 19th century and also in the 20th century. But like things like Notes from the Underground or Crime and Punishment, Rodion Raskolnikov, and Kafka's works, and all that stuff is often centered around this experience of sort of the madness of the isolated human being as it tries to reconnect with the world and is faced with nothing but suspicion and aggression, and also of course because the isolated individual is to some extent always a dysfunctional individual. So that's kind of a dark introduction, because notice that here we're sort of operating on the societal and the psychological levels, and what I love about this practice and using it in personal sessions as well, though I love a lot of things about it, but it's the fact that it's always able to discern what level the problem needs to be addressed at. And well, so often societal or psychological issues, well, they do of course require some adjustment within their own spheres, but they're often really brought into perspective and addressed by a spiritual approach. And I think that's sort of the wisdom that underscores religious systems when they work well. It's kind of giving the individual a framework to connect into the deeper parts of reality and to fulfill a role in their society, and to have a day that's structured and that's meaningful. and religion can sort of always offer that framework by having certain rituals, practices, communities, explanations for the world, the cosmologies and mythologies, like all these things that really keep together the disjointed world. And at the same time, of course, the problem with religion as opposed to spirituality, and I would actually rather use the term mysticism. But as opposed to mysticism, that is the personal approach of personal felt experience of a higher mind or greater nature or the divine or what you may call it. Is the problem is that religion sort of puts itself in the place of immediate experience, and if you want to go the route of immediate experience, the mystic path, it seems to be necessary for every individual to reiterate or repeat these conflicts within their own lives. So this type of bringing the human being out of its immediate context, the context that has happened in history, this process of deep alienation that we've experienced as a species from nature, is repeated in every one of us on an individual level, and it really needs to, or seems to need to, want to will manifest itself in an extremity in people who are on the spiritual path, in people who are sort of walking the path of walking home to themselves. There needs to be these intensifications of the problems that are manifest in the human experience and that are sort of keeping us away from happiness essentially, but remembering who we are and feeling the fullness of life. And therefore it seems that loneliness really needs to be an ingredient on the spiritual path. And it's I guess something I've faced a lot in my own life. And the paradox, of course, is often that I felt far less alone in my own company, following my own plans and agendas and interests that I have done, sort of being a misaligned cog in the general social machinery. And I think that's an experience that repeats itself for a lot of people I meet through this work who have been brought to these other aspects of reality. It is that they have also always had the feeling that there was something about the reality that was on offer for them growing up and going to school and maybe also in their work life that didn't exactly fit them or suit them, and that there was something else calling them. And that has often been a very, very painful process. And of course you could argue that everyone dies alone, and so loneliness is a basic fact of the human condition. But many people also seem to do quite well in avoiding that fact or distracting themselves from that fact until they're faced with death. And in that sense, which of course is probably something that a lot of spiritual traditions would agree with me with, the spiritual path is kind of a dying in life. It is moving into a preparation for death before you die, and the paradox here being that then you sort of awaken to the liberation of eternal life, which is the fact that what the true part of you can never die, and it is never alone, and is never anything but connected into the meaningful everflow, the great architecture of the all. And in that sense, you're singing your own voice in the choir of the all in perfect tune. And those were just some loose thoughts on on loneliness and the role it plays. But I've been wanting to connect to the Intergalactic Council. It's been a while, and it's of course it's the layer of consciousness that ties everything in the Milky Way galaxy together. So it's sort of the stratum of consciousness where all conscious beings emerge into and are connected in the Milky Way galaxy, and that's kind of what better entity to talk to about like this experience of feeling disjointed and at the same time being a part of a grander whole. So I hope you take something helpful from this, guys, and many blessings to all of you. We are the Intergalactic Council of Light. Most pleased to join you this day. Well, we address you about an issue that has no reality to us. And so our reality is expanding by encompassing this phenomenon of a human emotion you call loneliness. It's not an exclusively human emotion, and we can speak to that later. But the idea here is that loneliness isn't a part of higher dimensional reality. It's a part of the stage of graduation where you find yourself. That is, it's a part of fourth dimensional consciousness to experience loneliness. Because what fourth dimensional consciousness does is the first layer of consciousness to begin to break down the physical layers, that is the immediate constructs of reality, the first three dimensions. And it does this by separating things. So for instance, a hallmark of fourth dimensional consciousness is the discipline of logic. And what does the discipline of logic rely on? It relies on giving exact definitions to different units of determinate meaning and then opposing them to other units of determinate meaning, and thereby moving in a progression of definitions and exclusions into a bigger understanding of a subject. But you do this through an operation of separations. And this is what you're gradually learning to supply or complement with, let's call it systems theory. What we mean by this is it's the understanding of the systemic quality of everything, that everything is indeed a set of functions, and as that performs a type of holistic role that isn't in opposition, but rather in complementation of itself. And these levels of complementation, they repeat and restructure themselves on deepening levels of reality until you reach higher and higher states of consciousness. And these states of consciousness, they are all designated by the fact that, well, they perceive higher and higher degrees of unity, of connectivity. So this is where you are moving as a species. But why is it necessary for you to experience the stage of loneliness within these operations of mind, of separation? Well, it has to do with self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is an important phenomenon within the development of consciousness. That is within the ascension or the dimensional ladder of exploration of consciousness, of experience. You find that, well, you move from immediate reality, that is these more animalistic, or we could say infant stages of being absorbed in the physical world, And then you move into a space where you find that the physical world is a manifestation of a far greater and coherent reality behind it. But between these two layers, there needs to be what you could think of as the transistorial function of mind between these two layers. What do we mean by this? Well, if you were to think of a transistor, it runs electric currents through it, and then it runs it through a simple binary circuitry of flowing it either to one side or the other. That is a type of yes or no operation. That is, if you were to think of the higher dimensions or the existence within the understanding of universal energy as something that flows into your experience and informs it, then you are the link that brings this back into the material world. And so the experiment that's being conducted with human beings is how exactly that you will frame this sector of material existence with the materialization of these universal energies. So there would be no interest in the universe, in upholding reality such as you know it, if it didn't have an experiment to play out. And the experiment in many ways is you, it's the magic capabilities of humankind. That is, it's seeing how you inform this sector of the time space with this universal energy, selecting, condensing, reconfiguring, interpreting it, turning it into a creative play of shapes and manifestations. This is indeed your purpose. Well, and know this, that we consider this very broadly, as does the existence of source. That is, in the eyes of the divine, everything you do is a type of creative play work. That is, every time you take a breath, it's a type of translation of one type of energy into a type of different energy, whereby your biological system performs a series of functions that have a potential for randomization. And it's this potential for randomization that's really, really interesting to divine intelligence, because this is sort of where you act as the, say, slot machine or element of suspense within divine experience. It's by the way that you choose to exist that you carry yourself onward from moment to moment. Now, what does this have to do with loneliness? Well, loneliness then connects to the spiritual path. That is, it connects to the path of consciousness focused in an individual moving up into higher states of understanding of itself, connectivity, and remembrance. Well, exactly, because in these lower configuration patterns of connectivity that you, for instance, find in more what you know as 3D consciousness, more materially focused consciousness, less awakened consciousness, you will find fixation patterns there. And these fixation patterns, some of you obsess terribly about these. These also appear very negative, determinative, fearful, anxious, punishing. And therefore, well, what often happens is at the same time that you find your reward senses, for better or worse, connected to these social circuitries. And to move into this deconditioning, that is to move into a higher state of connectivity of your true self, you need to move into a deconditioning, and you need to be pushed out of those otherwise conditioning patterns of social reality. And so many of you find yourself on this spiritual path, on this path of coming home to yourself, caught in that situation where you feel that, well, you are not getting the rewards that you would prefer from social reality anymore, but you are not connecting into the spiritual reality either. You are in this painful place of this vacuum where one thing has been removed and the other thing is yet to emerge and fill out that space. And this is indeed a type of test of your mettle. That is, for us, this is a very, very short process. This is to us kind of like the painful stage where the butterfly may still feel that it, with its sticky wings, it's somewhat caught in its chrysalis. And this is where the hatchling emerging from its egg is also being scratched and having a little trouble really getting out of it. But it's just a moment in time, because you couldn't have dismounted all of these things without having created a space for higher connectivity. And so what you need to put into this is the type of positive spin that is, notice that, well, what you are lacking in this sense is actually just the content that you have been used to receiving all your life. And because this content is not pouring in, there is a type of emptiness, there is a type of withdrawal going on here. But at the same time, you do find that then there is an experimentation of what type of other content can then find you. And this content seems to have a fulfilling subtlety to it that's awakening something within you that has the promise of fulfillment. So it's not, for instance, these channel messages themselves that will permanently fulfill you, but they do hold the opportunity to activate something within you that has a sustainable vibration of fulfillment, that has a sustainable vibration of joy. And so what you often find is that when you then do try to, well, move out of your loneliness, not from a spontaneous place of expression or calling, but from a place of lack or of sort of contrived sociality, you will also discover that you actually often manifest situations where you're reminded that you prefer your own company to the often very challenging presence of being with someone else who doesn't really recognize you in that changing situation where you find yourself. And that is why we could say loneliness is the chrysalis. It is not you, it is not a dysfunction. It's a function of the fact that you are a butterfly. And well, to move into that final metamorphosis, that stage of you taking flight and showing your colors, there needs to be an embryonic stage, and you need to be surrounded by a type of cocoon of protection. And this is the cocoon of loneliness. This is the helpful, beneficial isolation that protects you from predatorial energies or random things that flow by or storms that may blow you off course while you just reshape, reform, and emerge as that beautiful creature with that shimmering patterning emerging from your wings as you fly free in the sun with the wind. Therefore, we of the Intergalactic Council, we have been glad to communicate with you, humanity. We have an open invitation to you to always elaborate and amplify the contact and the connection that we feel with you. We are always with you, but you can turn more to us and thereby gain more of this galactic consciousness. We transmit our deep, unwavering, stable, foundational love to you, to all of your creation, to your being, to your breath. Much love to you, humans. Blessings and peace. A long time since we spoke to the Intergalactic Council, but that was it was very pleasant for me to revisit them. So I hope you enjoyed. Much love to you.